Very cool. Welcome to another episode of Real Brave Live, our teaching. And today I'm joined here with Joshua Lombardi, drummer extraordinaire, who has a very big sound. If you were to listen to him in a room, it's deafening. But there's also technique behind that. And welcome, Josh. How are you?
I'm doing great. Good to be here, Dan.
All right, cool. Today we're going to answer this question: what is a drum fill? Before we get to that, we were discussing this guy, Mr. Bonham, Bonzo, as they call him, from Led Zeppelin, and he had. If there's anything I could say about this guy, is he had a big sound and a big drum fill. So what is a drum fill? What is a drum fill?
So my understanding of a drum fill is basically, our job as a drummer is to keep time. So most of the time we're playing, a simple beat, kind of like what you heard me playing before. Just most of the time we're just keeping a rhythm and a steady pattern. And the drum fill, a good definition of it would basically be a departure from the beat, going away from the beat for just a moment. And getting creative, playing something exciting. It's kind of your chance, kind of like a guitar solo, but shorter. It's your chance as a drummer to show off and show your personality on the drum set.
Cool. So where does this start? So if you're playing a beat, you've got, I mean, like you're doing before, and then you started going off. Where does this drum fill land?
Well, typically, the way I was introduced to this is you're basically playing a pattern of 3 measures of a beat, and then on the 4th measure, you're playing the fill. Now, obviously you're not going to do that in every song the same way every time, but that's a great way to start, is just getting comfortable counting measures and, playing that pattern of 3 measures of the beat, and on the 4th measure playing the fill.
Okay. So give me an example of that. What do we got to show our friends here?
So we'll start with a nice simple beat. The most basic kind of rock pop beat that you hear in a song is this 8th note beat, just 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and where you have a bass on 1 and 3, snare on 2 and 4, and you want to get comfortable counting through measures of that. So you start by just counting it like you normally would. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and what I actually like to do is I count that in my head, and I would change the number of beat 1 depending on what measure I'm playing. So I'd play through it and go 1, 2, 3, and then that brings us to beat 4. That's where you would play your fill, also taking up a full measure, but this time not playing exactly the same pattern.
Cool.
So now we get to the fun part. So first you want to get comfortable with that, just counting your measures. You can be pretty creative with how you're doing that. I've heard people go through it and go like 1 and 2 and 2 and 2 and 3 and 2. Like basically just changing the beat 1. But I always felt that was more confusing, and I would just get comfortable playing the beat and then count, what measure I'm on, changing the number each time. And then you start adding in, a fill on the 4th measure each time. So first, you probably want to start with quarter notes or 8th notes, something really simple just to get you used to the timing of it. So I'll show you what that would sound like. Let's start with a simple 8th note fill, so we're keeping the note values consistent. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you go back to your beat. So right on the beginning of beat 4, what I did is I moved to the snare drum and I played around the drums on my set. I played first on the snare, and then on rack tom 1, and then to the floor tom. And then my preferred drum setup is just a 4-piece kit, so I don't have a second tom here. So what I like to do is go back to the tom 1. So I just go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. If you have a drum set that has a snare, 2 toms, and a floor tom, it makes it really simple because you can just go around and go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and that brings you right back to your hi-hat.
That's I wasn't expecting that actually. What so you only have, I know that you have the rack tom and the floor tom.
I could bring in another tom, more drums.
Well, no, I mean, fun. I'm actually curious as to, so you're going, it's like snare, rack tom, floor tom, rack tom. So it's got like a different tonality to it too, because folks, if you didn't know this, that there's a tuning to drums. It's got like this, right? How do you explain that? I don't even know how to explain that. You can probably explain it better than me.
Playing on a setup like this, it does change the phrasing, and you're right, the tonality of it, because I only have a small tom here, and then I have a floor tom, which is, a very big drum, not quite the size of a bass drum, but it gives you more drastic kind of tonal intervals, because you're going from that like snare, high tom, and then you get that low tom sound. So it's a little more drastic than if you were to go, through drums that are basically sized like a 12, a 14, and then a 16. You're going to hear a more steady kind of tonal increase, I guess would be the word.
And you're going, yes. Let me hear that again. I wanted, because I never even noticed that you were doing that in the beginning.
Yeah. So this time I'm just going to play one measure of the beat, one measure of the fill, so you can hear it side by side.
Cool. Oh yeah.
Now here, I'm gonna grab another tom real quick.
Okay.
You can hear what it would sound like with, a big drum.
That was me doing hold music.
That was the elevator music.
Yeah. Hold please. Yeah, putting together, lugging drum. The last thing I want to do for the rest of my life is lug drums around.
I've gotten very good at that.
One of my least favorite things in the world is lugging drums around. Okay.
Okay. So yeah, now I'm gonna go through and play. I have 4 drums here, so I'm gonna play that fill evenly spaced across 4 drums.
Yeah, I hear the tonality now.
Yeah, so it sounds a little more, this is a very standard kind of rock drum setup where you have the 2 toms in the front, a snare, and then, your floor tom on your right side.
Yeah.
So that's not what Bonzo played. John Bonham was known for playing a snare, a rack tom, and then he had 2 floor toms, which kind of adds to his very big drum fill sound because he has 2 monstrous drums that he's playing the majority of the fills on.
What was on the floor?
His setup, he played like a big rack tom, like this one on the left side, and he played 2 floor toms. So on his right side, he had 2 like 18-inch size drums, monstrous. And that's part of what gives his drum fills, the cannon-like sound that they have.
I didn't know that. Wow. Yeah, that actually kind of makes sense. And that floor tom, those 2 floor toms were tuned differently?
Yeah, probably slightly differently. I think he probably played like one was a 16, one was an 18. So they had like, both very low drums, but one slightly, lower than the other.
If you ever get a chance, please, if you're watching this, to make sure that you're listening to Led Zeppelin, because it is just the textbook on, as far as I'm concerned, rock fills. And if you,
yeah, he's a great one for fills. you know, that I have a lot of favorite drummers, you know, for different reasons, but for drum fills, you know, it's hard not to mention John Bonham. He's
Right. Yeah, because it'd be like in the middle of the song, like in the middle of a verse, he'd start the drum fill.
Yeah, he's a character for sure. So now watching this at home, you know, so far you're probably a little underwhelmed by some of these fills because they're simple note values. We're keeping it, you know, consistent with the beat that I'm playing. So I'm playing that eighth note beat, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. What makes drum fills, I think, exciting is that, you know, you could be playing an eighth note beat and you could play a 16th note fill. You could also play a combination of different note values. It doesn't have to be, you know, you can be very creative with it, essentially, which is part of what makes it fun and what adds some excitement to, you know, the feeling of playing the drums and to the song that you're playing.
Okay.
So now we should definitely talk about applying this to different note values. You play the beat. The beat we're going to keep consistent. Every time you're going to play just an eighth note beat, the beat is unchanged. But what is going to change is the note value that you're playing. So we already talked about the eighth notes. Now, probably the most common fill you'll hear is a 16th note drum fill. You know, one full measure, 1 E-enda, 2 E-enda, 3 E-enda, 4 E-enda. You know, you hear that in every style of music. You know, it's a very basic fill, but a really, you know, an exciting one and a really powerful one. So let's talk about a 16th note fill.
Do it. Yeah.
So now I'm going to play through that, counting measures like I was doing before, just putting the measure on beat 1 each time. And then on that fourth measure, I'm going to play the 16th note fill.
All right.
2, 3, 2, 3.
Awesome. How do you keep time? To me, speaking as a terrible drummer, the distance between each note, each rhythm, right? So like if you're playing 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then, right, we're talking like eighth notes, then going from that to 16th notes, you have to understand that there's a distance, right? A distance between each note so that you know that if we're going to hit 4 notes in one beat, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to hit 2 notes in one beat, that those are completely different. So how do you teach that? So to make sure that transition going from 1 and 2 to
Yeah, this is something I definitely remember, you know, myself as, you know, like a 10-year-old practicing this, having my own frustration with it, you know, finding that, you know, basically keeping the tempo consistent. So when you're going from an eighth note beat to a 16th note fill, it's hard as a beginner not to speed up or slow down because your instinct is kind of like you're changing note values to a faster note.
Mm-hmm.
Instinctively, you almost want to speed up, or, you know, if the fill's really fast and you're playing a slower beat, maybe it's hard to keep up. Like you might like slow down the tempo a little bit. So obviously, playing to a metronome is a great way to get used to playing those fills consistently with your beat. You know, you could set a metronome to, I was probably playing at about 70 or 80 beats per minute just now. If you set a metronome and you play your beat along with it, and then you go through the fill, you'll hear that click in your ear, and it's going to make it, you know, it'll kind of pull you back. If you speed up, it'll help you slow back to the right tempo. Or if you speed up, you know, or the other way around, it makes it easier to catch up. But what I would recommend doing to start in practicing this is, you know, play your beat and feel the tempo that you're playing that. And then as you go through the fill, keep a bass drum on the quarter note so that it helps you keep that tempo going. So like, you know, tapping your foot will help will at least help you stay closer to like the true tempo of the beat that you're playing.
Cool.
So now I'll show you that. If you're watching my leg as I'm playing through it, you'll see me tapping my foot along with that 16th note fill. 1, 2, 3. Now there's a little challenge there is just the coordination, coordinating your hands doing one movement and your foot doing the quarter note on, beat 1. But once you just get comfortable with that, I found it helpful, at least in helping me stay at a steady tempo as I would change between note values and switch between a beat and a fill.
Love it. Awesome.
Now, the most important thing that, I don't want to not talk about this, because I feel the most important thing of playing a fill is actually coming back in on the beat. Because you could play a great fill, and if you don't land back on beat 1, it kind of, it falls flat. Because, as we were saying, the most important thing as a drummer is keeping time. And if you totally drop the beat when you go to play a fill, you're not keeping time. Time stops at that moment. So,
right.
In practicing your fills, a great way to make it really obvious where the fill ends and where the beat starts again is getting used to crashing on 1. Because if you get used to hearing that crash every time at the end of the fill on 1, it kind of helped me commit it to memory. Hearing that crash, I would say like, all right, that's 1. So now I'm going to play through it and hit that crash on 1, and then I'm going to show you some tricks I've learned in crashing on 1 that'll make it a little bit, less frustrating in learning it.
Okay.
So we play through same exercise, 3 measures of the beat, 1 measure fill. 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1. Now, so when you go to hit that crash, the strange thing about that is you're starting the beat up again on the crash, which means that you're actually coming back to the hi-hat on and of 1.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Not on beat 1. And that's what kind of trips everybody up. I could try to demonstrate it. Like you'll hear a lot of people basically do this. They'll go like,
yeah.
So you hear the crash, and then you hear the beat start after the crash.
Right. They're forgetting that they've already come to 1. That's the crash, and they have to start on the upbeat.
Yeah, and that's totally understandable, because it is going to be, a little uncomfortable at first. The most important thing you can do is make sure you're hitting a bass drum on 1 with your crash, because that's, if you get used to hitting that bass drum on 1, it gets you, it helps you understand that bass is where the beat starts again. So really important, when you go to hit that crash on 1, hit your bass drum with it and count. You're going to go 1 and 2. Now, obviously, this depends on the beat you're playing, because if you're playing a quarter note beat, just 1, 2, 3, 4, you're going to be hitting that crash on 1 and then coming back to the hi-hat and the snare on 2. So it does depend on the beat you're playing, but assuming we're just, talking about a simple 8th note rock beat, you want to just get used to doing this, going 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And so really be mindful of that even though you're thinking of that crash probably as the end of your fill, it's really the beginning of your beat again. So make sure you hit a bass with it, and then you're coming back to that hi-hat on the and, not on the 1.
Yeah.
And, I see people make that mistake several times a day, and it's a pretty easy one to correct. Once you just think about it that way, and I've seen people in 2 minutes be like, oh, I see what you mean, and then they'll never do it like that again. So once you just think of it that way and count through it like that, it just becomes kind of second nature. But definitely an important lesson to learn, and that's what gives your fill its power. When you play that fill and you hit that crash on one and come back in on the beat, it's a good feeling. Like, I remember doing that as a 10-year-old and seeing like my bandmate look at me and go like, yeah, that sounded great. And that was kind of my affirmation of like, okay, I did it right, and that's how I should do it from now on. So
yeah. I remember that rush when a drummer in the early days of playing in a band, a drummer would like nail an awesome fill, just like crush it, and you never heard it from that drummer before. You're just like, yeah, man,
Yeah, I still do. I'll still play with my bands, and as a drummer, you try stuff. You have to try new things. When you're having a rehearsal, and I would try something, and they'd look at me like, where did that come from? And it's still the same feeling. It's still that awesome feeling of like, all right, we'll keep that one.
That was fun. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I just remember that feeling. You talking about it just now. I remember that feeling. It's a good drummer makes a band, honestly. In rock, in jazz, like, it's important. You agree, disagree, hate it?
Yeah, I mean, to me, my interest was never really being, in the front. I wasn't like, look, I just always played drums, it seemed like, and that was kind of where I wanted to be. But I always felt like in the bands I played in, I was irreplaceable. It's like, if the drummer doesn't show up, there's no rehearsal. If the guitarist is a half hour late, we're gonna get started. But the drummer just felt like in every case was kind of the leader, and that's I prided myself on knowing like I'm keeping the ship afloat, and it's not about like the attention. It's just like I have to be here, and that's my job.
You heard it here first. The drummer is the most important guy in the band, and I'm agreeing for some reason.
But yeah, I mean, everyone has a role, and I just think the drummer is, as I said before, like in the absence of a conductor, the drummer's the conductor. So that's actually an important thing to mention about fills as well. A lot of the times in a song, fills aren't just used to show off. We think of it as this way of showing off on the drum set, but a lot of the time, drummers use fills to signal a change in the song. Like at the end of a verse, you might hear a fill, and that's what brings you into the chorus of that song. And that's kind of what is signaling the bandmates, like, okay, now we're going to a chorus, or it's telling the audience that, drum fills are important in that way, that they're this signifier of like, okay, now something is about to happen in the song. Great example of that is Bohemian Rhapsody. That whole song is basically conducted by Roger Taylor, and he holds it down. He's what makes that song, I think, as great as it is.
Ooh, yeah, and you never think of it from a percussion point of view. We did that here in the Jersey location. Actually, my son did it, and I sang. He held it down, but it was one of the most fun I've ever had. And you really think about it, yeah, because it's really out of the ordinary. And I don't know the time signatures, and I'm not going to get into that because, oh my god, but it's pretty well done.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously, like, the standout in that song is really the vocal performance and all the layers of vocals on that. And you have great guitar parts, but think about what that song would sound like without drums.
Right.
And Roger Taylor doing like the no. Like,
that's what I was thinking.
Every back hit that he does, every drum fill is very important and very, has a huge impact on the feel of that song.
Mamma mia, mamma mia. All right. Well, guys, we're going to wrap this up. Did we answer this question here? What is a drum fill? I think we got the basics down, huh?
I think so. And obviously this is just a start. We could talk about drum fills for a whole year straight, but
I think we should actually. And let's get it. offline we'll talk about some different camera angles. But just for an introductory, this is perfect. This is absolutely perfect because seeing you talk about it is great because you love the instrument and you're a great teacher. So thanks for this, Josh.
Yeah, thank you. I hope it inspires some people to start playing some fills and having a blast on a drum set.
You heard it. Play some fills. Okay, you want to take us out while I close this up? You can play something there?
Oh, yeah. You have to ask me twice.
Go for it. All right, guys, check this out.